I would have bled to death in probably a pretty short period of time because I had lost my foot.
Hey there, my name's Rishi Sharma. I'm on a mission to interview all the World War II veterans. Thank you so much for watching this video. Today we have an incredible interview with a gentleman who is an amputee from the war at the age of 18. You're going to hear his story coming up, but I want to also thank Adam Hammet, who runs a personal training group called Serious Results. He connected me to this veteran and his family, and I really appreciate that. And I also want to thank the Stanley W. Eskrim Foundation for their generous support to make interviews like this happen.
Hello, I'm Arzell Ball.
It is such an honor to meet you. Thank you for this opportunity. Could you please tell us, sir, where and when were you born?
I was born in Eagle Rock, Missouri in November 1925.
So that makes you how old right now?
99.
That's incredible. What's it like to be 99?
Well, it's pretty nice. I've been healthy all this time, so that's a positive.
Absolutely. Could you please tell us, sir, you mentioned you were born in Missouri. Is that where you grew up?
Well, I grew up a few years, and then we moved to Klamath Falls, Oregon, and I lived there a number of years. Fortunately, my dad had a job, so a lot of people were unemployed during the Great Depression. He had a job, and so we made out okay. And Oregon had pretty good schools. I went to Fort Hood for basic training. I think that's about 6 weeks. And then to Camp Shelby, Mississippi. They explained to you that the infantry, it's going to be rough, and this training is necessary for you to be a good soldier. In training, we had to go under the barbed wire, and we were afraid and concerned about snakes at that time because they were crawling around too. They were firing, and so we had to stay under that. Well, it's getting you used to combat. That's the purpose, and then how you will react in combat.
After his training, Mr. Ball joins the 78th Infantry Division, also known as the Lightning Division, and is sent overseas to combat. What are your early memories of combat?
How difficult it was. You were lucky if you even had something to eat, or enough ammunition, or you lucky if you didn't get hit.
What do you remember about the German breakthrough during the Battle of the Bulge?
Well, it was very difficult because they broke through in many spots, and you were lucky if you had any opportunity to sleep even. In the infantry, if you were close enough to the enemy, you could see them. Your close calls were about every hour.
So there were times that you could clearly see the German infantry?
Yeah, there were times, yes, and there were times that the person or people with me were injured, and I wasn't. Well, I remember the enemy would toss a mortar, and pieces of it would fly by. Well, we were in foxholes, and if we saw them coming, of course, we would get them, if possible. If we were told to move, that's when it became really dangerous. We had to get out of our foxhole and run forward, and they were lucky if we didn't get hit.
If you could mention, sir, what it was like to be under the German artillery bombardments.
Well, you tried to get underground as much as possible, or at least in a foxhole, to avoid the flying metal.
The shrapnel?
Yes, in fact, that's what eventually got me. And I remember the German snipers. When we were in a village or town, They usually were on the roof or up high, and you didn't know where they were, or behind the chimney or something, and they could fire at you, and you were looking for the ground, and they were in the building. So it was very difficult to fight in a town, and a lot of our territory there were villages and towns, and they had some type of protection from where they were, and you didn't. They could see you coming.
What is that like, Mr. Ball, when you're going through a town not knowing if the enemy has a bead on your head?
It's scary, but you have to do it. We try to avoid injuring children, particularly, and as Barbara mentioned, women. And we would gather them up, and after we had taken the town, we'd put them in a church, and of course the enemy knew that that's where they would be, and then they would pick them up after the battle was over.
And what do you remember about going house to house looking for the German soldiers?
Well, it's very, you try to go in the house where they would not be expecting you. In other words, it shouldn't be the front door. So you try to find a back door someplace or climb in through a window.
And what happens when you get inside?
Well, you try to protect yourself and yet get the enemy, because they'll stay in that house as long as they can.
In your particular situations, were there times that you encountered German soldiers in the houses?
Yes. And they surrendered in most cases because we had won the battle. Well, a lot of streets were flat because the Air Force had come in and dropped bombs just to help us out, and that really made a difference. And so they were either about to fall or had fallen in a lot of cases. The conditions, remember this was winter too that I was there, and we wrapped up the best we could, and we slept on the ground, and with our combat uniform on. And we were tired enough that we slept, and then the officer would come by and wake us up when it was time for combat. So we'd get, sometimes we wouldn't get over 3 or 4 hours sleeping outside on the snow. Or we would sometimes get in a house, and that wasn't very safe. And officers didn't like that, so we tried to find a place where we could get out of the wind if possible, but we didn't get much sleep.
Can you talk a little bit more about the winter conditions and what happened to the guys' feet?
Well, they had to try to keep their socks dry if possible, and you carry some extra socks in your pockets, and if your feet were frozen, you were blamed for that. It was up to you to make sure they didn't freeze. So you were badly treated by the Army if you had frozen feet. I crossed the Ludendorff Bridge is elevated, and I got across, and then I didn't get off the bridge. I just got across the river, the Ludendorff Bridge, and I got hit by artillery shell fragments, which knocked my right foot off and broke my left leg. And fortunately, a guy behind me carried me off the bridge and got me medical help eventually.
That's incredible. Can you take us through, Mr. Ball, actually crossing the bridge? What kind of condition was the bridge in? Were you guys taking fire?
Well, the enemy knew. The enemy knew that's what we were going to do, was cross the bridge, and they were firing at the bridge, and we were told to cross it. And I was lucky to get across, but that's as far as I got. And the guy behind me carried me off.
And could you tell us, Mr. Ball, what did it feel like when you got hit?
Well, I was numb and lying there, and I couldn't move. And so the guy picked me up and carried me off, which he saved my life. My companion put a tourniquet on my right leg to stop the bleeding. Otherwise, I would have bled to death in probably a pretty short period of time, because I had lost my foot. And it turned out that surgery, they actually only have 6 inches below the knee. And then this was hit right here, above there's a big scar there.
So the other soldier, he helps you. Where does he take you?
He just carried me over across, out of the direct fire. And we were terribly safe, but the enemy was firing at the bridge. So he got me away from the bridge far enough that I didn't get hit again. Well, after the Americans had taken the bridge, then they picked up the wounded and took them to the hospital. When I got to the first aid station, the important thing was then to stop the blood. I was bleeding out of my left leg too, and so they had to wrap both legs. Yeah, a piece of the uniform was caught in the wound. That had to be removed, and certain cleaning made by the hospital.
When you were at the first aid station, is that when you were made aware of the state of your injuries?
Yes.
How did that conversation happen? Did a doctor, I mean, can you tell us that story, please?
Well, they told me that they didn't think they'd have to remove this one, that they treated it as a broken leg. But on this one, they had to do surgery and stop the blood flow, and here I am with a prosthesis. They had to amputate my right leg and treat this one as a broken leg, my left leg.
So when you were told that your leg would have to be amputated, and you're 18 years old, what was that like for you, Mr. Ball?
It was pretty difficult for me. I couldn't figure out how I could survive with an amputation at that time, because I'd never known a person with an amputation.
Did you feel like your life, the life that you had hoped for, was not going to happen?
Yes, I felt like it would be difficult, and then I got a counselor in the Army, and he said that your way out, you have to get a job where you can't stand all day. You have to get a job where you can not necessarily do physical work. So anyway, he said, you have to go to college. So I did. Yeah, because of my injury in the prosthetic, I couldn't dance. And I always wore, I never wore shorts out in the public. I never wore shorts, period. I always tried to cover up my disability.
Were you embarrassed of it?
Well, I don't know if I was embarrassed, but I just I didn't want to have to explain it. And I wasn't particularly proud of it. So I just wanted it covered up.
The reason I ask that is it's interesting because a lot of modern day people, veterans included, would make a point to visibly show their prosthetic because they would want that attention. And so it's just, the way you live your life is very much in line with the World War II generation of humbleness, being reserved.
Well, I tried to be a positive person and take good care of myself, and which I've done. And I've tried to help others, and I've tried just to overlook my handicap. I never discuss it with people.
Thank you so much for watching this video, and God bless the World War II veterans.